Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bold Take Scouting Podcast. As you may see, I do not have my usual partner, Alex Greb, with me today. That's just part of being able to balance being a college student and having this hobby on the side. And as much as we'd love to be able to give you the best content, sometimes we can't stop that. There's an availability like that, but it's all right. I'm going to be going around some of the hot topics in the college football world and in the NFL, just things that have come to mind to me, things that I thought would be good discussion points and that I would want to share my thoughts on to you guys. So, the first one is Jalen Waddle's performances and usage with the Miami Dolphins. He was really one of the best players on the field in London this past Sunday against the Jacksonville Jaguars. He caught, I think it was 6 passes for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns, um, really keeping Miami in there in a game that they unfortunately did lose. And that was with Devontae Parker out. So he really had to serve as the team's wide receiver one, and he stepped up really well in that regard. But part of what I'm thinking about Jalen Waddle is that he really just isn't being used correctly by the Dolphins. I think that he's such a dynamic player that really should be used as a deep threat way more than he is. He's averaging only 8 yards per reception. And we're seeing him get, and it was 10 catches, I'm sorry, against the Jaguars, and we're seeing him having to accumulate so many catches with because he's really just being used primarily on some of these shallow routes when this is one of the fastest guys in the NFL. He can hit you with a really smooth double move that's absolutely lethal to get past the defensive back. And throughout his last season in college, even though it was shortened by injury, he showed a really good ability to stack the defensive back on his hip and take off. And it's a shame to not be seeing him used in that way for the Dolphins. It's I don't think it's because of Tua Tagovailoa's limitations at the quarterback position, because at Alabama they had a good rapport and Waddle was able to go deep. I don't buy the narrative that Tua just can't throw the deep ball. He doesn't. His arm strength might not be as great as some other young quarterbacks, such as Josh Allen or Justin Herbert, but I think it's plenty good enough to be able to use Waddle to the best of his abilities and really unleash him as a dynamic deep threat. So while I am impressed by what Waddle has done so far in his short NFL career, I do hope that the Dolphins are going to unleash him and let him go deep way more often, because then he can really be one of the best rookies in this draft class. And they certainly paid the price to be able to get him. And that's the next thing I want to talk about, bridging into how the Eagles have an amazing amount of draft capital in this upcoming draft in 2022. And one of those reasons is because they currently, if the draft were to end today, would have the second overall pick from Miami. Because as you may recall, Miami moved down from the third overall pick to the 12th overall pick in the 2020 NFL draft in that trade that allowed the 49ers to draft Trey Lance. And then they immediately moved back up to the sixth overall pick, and they picked Jalen Waddle with that selection. And as much as I like Waddle, I think that giving a first rounder to move up from 12 to 6 for him was really excessive. And we saw the trade the Eagles made with the Cowboys where they only gave a third rounder to move from 12 to 10 to get Devontae Smith. And I really I had Devontae Smith slightly ahead of Jalen Waddle in the draft process, and I certainly don't think that there's a first round pick difference between Smith and Waddle, given that I think Smith is actually the slightly better prospect coming out. But so that means Miami really needs to start using Waddle right, because it's turning into a huge investment now that Miami is 1-5 and currently second in the draft order. That brings me to the Eagles, who on top of that have their own draft pick, which is currently 10th in the draft order, and will likely end up with the Colts' draft pick. If that happens, they get the Colts' first round draft pick if the Colts have Carson Wentz play 75% of snaps this season. So barring an injury to Carson Wentz, which is very possible given his injury history, the Eagles will be getting a first round pick from the Colts as part of that trade. And so as it stands right now, they have the second overall pick, the ninth overall pick, and the 10th overall pick. 3 top 10 picks, which is really great news for the franchise that really just needs an infusion of talent everywhere. And I think they could get so much value if they were to use each of those selections on a top 10 talent. But what I'm thinking is it's hard to see that draft capital that they're going to have, to consider Jalen Hurts' performances this year, and to think they're not going to be potentially making a move for a quarterback. I think that's going to be one of the biggest storylines in draft season. I think as soon as the draft order gets set, and especially if Carson Wentz stays healthy and the Eagles get the Colts' first round pick, it's immediately going to be one of the biggest narratives of the draft season. And I think let's dive into it a little bit. Jalen Hurts has really been a mixed bag so far this year. We've seen him be a little sloppy with his mechanics, not very accurate, really just some issues with his footwork overall. And he definitely has a tendency to bail the pocket before he really needs to. And I've seen a lot of people that are condemning him and calling even for him to be benched, which I wouldn't go that way, because I would still want to give him his chance for the rest of the season to show what he's worth, especially since you're going to have to make such a big decision at the quarterback position with the draft capital they're going to have. But I've also seen other people who are just saying that, oh, this is Nick Sirianni, the head coach's fault. And I think it's a little bit of both. I think that Nick Sirianni's offense is just not being tailored to Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts doesn't have the level of a passer, of a pocket passer, to be able to efficiently execute Nick Sirianni's offense. And Nick Sirianni is not really doing much to be able to play to Hurts' strengths and to diminish his weaknesses. So I think that marriage is not going to last long. With the draft capital they have, and given that Sirianni's in his first year as a head coach and Hurts was only a second round pick, they don't have a first round draft capital attached to him. I definitely think they could move on from Jalen Hurts at the end of this season if they end up with 3 top 10, top 15 picks. And I think I would be in favor of it. I had a third round grade on Jalen Hurts, and I think he's played better than that. He's proved me wrong to a certain extent, but I still don't think he's a franchise quarterback. I thought that he would never be a really natural passer, and he certainly isn't yet, and he really may never be. My comparison for him was Tyrod Taylor, and I think that could still end up holding to be a good comparison. That he could be the type of player that is a really good backup, a really good bridge quarterback who can do a lot with his legs and be serviceable as a passer, but I really just don't see him having the upside of some of the other really athletic quarterbacks in this league, like Lamar Jackson. So with 3 potential top 10 picks, I could really see the Eagles moving on from Jalen Hurts, and I don't think it would be the worst of ideas. And the last thing that's on my mind regarding the Eagles and their draft capital in 2022 is if whether or not Howie Roseman will get to make those picks. He was really smart in being able to accumulate that draft capital. I think both of the trades that involved Jalen Waddle and the other one that involved Carson Wentz were brilliant, and they're definitely getting the better end of the deal. But if you look at Howie Roseman's draft record, it's really, really bad, honestly. There's a lot of holes. You see some really blatant mistakes, like picking Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson last year. A couple of years ago, picking J.J. Arcega-Whiteside over DK Metcalf, which is something I'm never going to comprehend. And I think a lot of people share that opinion. So while Roseman did get these draft picks for the Eagles, and while he did choose the current coach, I think it's time for the Eagles to move on from Roseman too, because he just isn't the guy I would want to trust with making those picks, even though it was definitely good business by him to be able to accumulate them. So it'll definitely be really interesting to see how the rest of the season winds out for the Eagles in terms of what picks they're going to get. And I have a comment right here from Walter. Any chance the Eagles trade up with Detroit? Perhaps 100%. I mean, we're so far away from the draft, so it almost sounds silly to talk about trading up. But when we see the Eagles potentially having 3 top 10 picks and the option to really get any quarterback they want with that draft capital because of a potential trade up, I could definitely see that happening. And Detroit is a team that's still looking to get talent across the board, really at almost every position. So I could see them being a trade down candidate as they were this year, even though it didn't materialize. So moving on to the next topic is Matt Corral. And I mean, wow, he is really one of the Heisman frontrunners right now, as he deserves to be, because he's been really, really good for Ole Miss so far. I had the chance to watch his full game against Tennessee, in which he went 21 for 38 with 231 yards, 2 touchdowns and an interception, and 30 carries for 195 yards. I was really impressed by him. I think that it was a confirmation that he has all of the traits necessary to be a franchise quarterback in the NFL in terms of arm strength, accuracy, being a natural passer, being able to read defenses, and being able to use his legs. This game against Tennessee was really a showcase of his athletic ability. I think people were really under recognizing that in the offseason because I think he really is a true dual threat quarterback. But at the same time, he absolutely should not be running 30 times in a game. That was actually the highest number of carries for an Ole Miss player since Ben Jarvis Green Ellis carried the ball 33 times in a game in 2007. And Matt Corral is a quarterback, not a running back. So and we see that hurt him because he's currently questionable with an ankle injury for their next game. So I love his running ability, but on that side note, I really hope that Ole Miss is going to conserve him a little more because having him run 30 times is just not a good idea at all. His interception was a little worrying. It was a situation where he just was trying to extend the play, running towards the sideline, and he forced it when he shouldn't have. But it was his first interception of the season. That being said, I hope that this doesn't start a turnover issue in the remainder of the season because I'll remind you, Matt Corral was a guy who had so many great games last year and looked like a top 10 pick in the majority of games. But he had a 6 interception outing against LSU, or a 6 interception outing against Arkansas, and a 5 interception outing against LSU. So in those games, everything unraveled at once he threw a pick or two, and he was really just making every possible mistake with the remainder of the turnovers in that game, being incapable of reading defenses, making poor decisions, poor accuracy, and I just want to see Matt Corral finish off the season without having any turnover issues. And then I really think I can have full confidence in him as a future NFL franchise quarterback because he certainly has all the tools. And so moving on to the last topic, excuse me, Coastal Carolina is a team that I think people are just still sleeping on. And it's amazing because they went undefeated in the regular season last year. They lost in the bowl game, so finishing the season with only one loss, and they're 6-0 right now. Only one game has been remotely close, and there's just so much talent on both sides of the ball. They really brought back most of the team from 2020. I really like Grayson McCall as a college quarterback. He's really smart, really accurate, just a highly reliable quarterback, and he's sneaky athletic too. Isaiah Likely's establishing himself as one of the best tight ends in the game, and he could even be the first tight end off the board in April. And they've got Javon Hailey, who is still not really getting a lot of buzz from NFL scouts, but boy, if you look at the box score every game for Coastal Carolina, he's usually just absolutely stuffing the stat sheet, and he's a monster in terms of production. And I think that he's a real asset for Coastal. And then their defense is really solid all around too. They have some really underrated players like CJ Brewer, Jeffrey Gunter, and Jordan Strong. We actually have an interview, Alex and I, with Jordan Strong from May. And so if you want to go back and check that out, that was definitely, I think, one of the most fun ones we had. He was a really energetic, enthusiastic guy. But to get back on topic, Coastal Carolina, I think, will finish the regular season undefeated. And I think they'll deserve to be in a New Year's Six bowl. And I hope that they get the recognition and that they have that opportunity because this is a team that is now in their second year of being one of really the top 10, 15 teams in college football. And I know that the strength of schedule isn't great, but that this is still an extremely good team. And I see Walt say, as for Corral, love his talent, but he runs too hot and cold. Yeah, I think that'll be really a common theme in this draft class for the quarterbacks. It's definitely not one of the strongest ones because it lacks really just sure things and elite prospects. But it definitely has a lot of talent. You see guys like Matt Corral, Sam Howell, Malik Willis that have really appealing skill sets. You just don't see them putting it together on a consistent basis. And that's what I think that NFL scouts are going to want to see from Corral the rest of the season and from the other guys as well. And I think it's shaping up to be a really interesting draft season at the quarterback position because there's just so many unknowns. I think that last year at this point, we already knew, Trevor Lawrence is going to be the first overall pick, and then it's between Zach Wilson and Justin Fields to be the second quarterback, and then maybe Trey Lance after that, Mac Jones after that. And it didn't exactly shake out that way, but we already had a good idea. And right now, it's still completely open. We don't know who the first quarterback is going to be at all, and we don't even really know what other quarterbacks are going to go in the first round. Will a guy like Carson Strong improve in the second half of the season to be a first-round pick like a lot of people thought he would become. We've even seen Kenny Pickett's name being thrown out there in the first round buzz. I haven't watched too much of him, so I can't really speak to that yet. But there's just so many quarterbacks out there that have still a first round potential. And that was the case coming into the season, where I know Alex and I scouted 10 quarterbacks and we ranked them. You can check out our Instagram page for that. But there just was no certainty into how it would unfold and who would go where in the draft. And we still don't have much more certainty. We know that Spencer Rattler will really unlikely be in the NFL draft in 2022 as he's lost his job to Caleb Williams. So that's one major development that seems to be pretty sealed because Caleb Williams seems to be running away with that job. And he's played very well in the 2 games that he's had at the quarterback one position for Oklahoma. But other than that, it's still wide open. And so I'm really excited to see how all these guys close out the season as we're entering the second half of the college football year. And man, it's going to be really interesting. I can't wait to be getting around to the time where the season's wrapping up and we've got guys declaring, so we know more of how the NFL draft map is going to be looking like, and we can just really start digging into the tape. So it's going to be exciting, and we'll keep you guys in the loop. And starting next week again, we'll have Alex on as part of our two-man show right at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesdays, as usual. He just couldn't make it today because of some academic commitments, but we'll be back next Tuesday with another episode of the Bull Take Scouting Podcast. So thank you to those who have tuned in today, and see you next